Welcome to the Common Good podcast, where change agents in social sectors, business, and community and faith meet at the intersection of belonging and imagination and gifts. I'm your host, Troy Bronsink from The Hive in Cincinnati, Ohio. What began as a friendship between Peter Block and John McKnight and Walter Brueggemann has grown now into a fellowship program where for 12 weeks, 30 fellows from around the world are working together through what it means to journey into the common good and looking at it specifically through their own experiments of imagination. This season is focusing on the work of those fellows as well as the advisors and hosts of that program. Today we're talking with Rama Naidu, who's from Durban, South Africa. He works in organizational development, working with leaders in diversity and transformation and the art of community building. He's the executive director of the Democracy Development Program, and a lot of his work is as facilitator with the nation of South Africa on their Partners of Possibility program.
I really slow things down at that point and say it's okay not to take responsibility right now. But are we aware that when we do speak, when we claim our freedom, what is the cost to yourself and to the other?
Our conversation touches on the structure of belonging and the ways that change happens in community, and primarily around stewardship, leadership that's not simply hierarchical, but about understanding shared responsibility and instilling responsibility in communities. Our conversation kicks off as he's describing the DDP, this project that he founded.
I've always been in Durban and worked for a program. In fact, started the program called the Democracy Development Program. And the whole idea was about citizen empowerment and embedding democracy. And very quickly I learned that democracy is not a concept that can be learned or taught, except through direct experience of a benefit or something coming out of it. And that shifted me into a space to try and question the big words like empowerment and saving people and teaching people and leading them to the chosen land. And I kind of knew intuitively it didn't work. But in the absence of any other model of looking at it, that was the paradigm that we were given about a leader-led organization, leader-led structure, very patriarchal structure. And about 10 years down the line, Peter came to South Africa. Wham! It just hit me about the fact that we had so little understanding of how communities really work and the dynamics of it, that I had to go back to a clean canvas again and rethink the work of the organization. So based on that input, I restructured the entire process of the organization to be community-centered and for the learning to be incidental to their daily lives, so that they, in fact, we didn't have to teach democracy, they learned through it experientially, through their projects, through the dilemmas, through the questions, through the protests. And that, of course, continued to deepen as I went into the neighborhoods and experienced brokenness, experienced the notion of single stories of poverty at the coalface, and having to unlearn a whole lot of stuff about my own story of broken communities and of poverty, and having to work through a completely new way of viewing this. And of course, that once that shift had happened in my mind, everything since that time has been around the notion of activating, raising awareness, letting people do their own work. And so it was a natural step to kind of imbibe everything that Peter had put into his book so beautifully and try and take it, adapt it to our context in South Africa and see how we work in a country that has been so battered and ravaged by a legacy of apartheid, of inequality, very different from the American model as you have it now, and really trying to work under difficult circumstances, one in which people believe that they had to be in a situation of hands out, let me wait and hopefully somebody will give us something, to asking the other questions, so what do we have that we can start to work on? How do we reclaim our dignity, our sense of work, and those kind of things? And that means it's given me opportunities to be very open to listening to what's happening in these spaces and work with what we have.
Well, tell us a little bit about what's happening. Like, would you feel comfortable sharing a story where that transition to activating and people doing their own work, what that journey's like?
So very often it starts off, with a community or NGO, nonprofit organization contacting us to say, Can you help us? We've got a problem, and they always come up with a problem. So what's the problem? It's the same everywhere. It's teenage pregnancy, it's drugs, it's unemployed youth, all the stuff that we all know about so well.
Those make it across the ocean to us too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, the first thing I would do is and this particular community went in for 3 days. Luckily, we were able to get a big academic institution to fund it, to gather this community, the leaders, the churches, the principals together, 300 of them into a big hall, and to talk about the community. And we use the methodology, the small groups.
Yep.
And people were very, very skeptical about the process, even people who were helping me co-facilitate. It was just a new way of being in the world.
Yeah.
And day one was difficult because people were not getting it. But as the small groups started their work, with no intention of getting to a product quickly, no commitments, and really taking our time about that, by the second half of the second day, something magical started to happen in the room. The individuals began to own part of that conversation. You had the schools and the churches, and instead of abdicating responsibility, quite powerfully stood up and took responsibility in the room. And my question was, at that point, people clap, and I said, hold your applause. The work hasn't started yet. This is the kind of easy part. We all stand up and grandstand. So the first guy stood up and said, I'll do this work. In front of the group, I said, okay, let's see what this means. What is it that you want to do? How will you do it? What does your commitment mean to this group? Do you understand what your commitment means? And took them through a process. And at the end of that, I wouldn't call it an interrogation, but saying, do you understand what you're saying, and whether you'll do it, and what it means if you don't do it to this community? And that kind of set things going, because the other commitments didn't come thick and fast anymore, but they went a lot deeper into the space. They set up small work groups, ended up after 3 days with just 2 projects. One was, let's own the neighborhood.
Wow.
Just let's own the neighborhood. And I asked us, what would that entail? Where can you start that requires no money, no outside help, just what you have inside your community? And so they said it'd be a park cleanup. Mm-hmm. No money. First Sunday of the month, they would gather at the park. So I told them, listen, I'll turn up at the park. And half skeptical that they would anyone ever turn up. But they did. They turned up, they cleaned the park, and after that it was history. Once they started the work, it's interesting. Once you started and people see it happening, the city saw that happening. Mm-hmm. And so now that park has become an outdoor gym. It's maintained by the city. Now wants to put money into something that is working. So the notion of, once you start something, other people are more likely to join into the initiative, even with resources. So from that project, the churches started getting involved, the schools started getting involved. This was 3 or 4 years ago. Wow. Every time I go into that community, I see something new happening there. It's not all easy going, but the sense is that notion of ownership and what commitment means is embedded in the community. So wherever we go into a community, and there are many stories like that, the notion is always to let people begin to understand, first of all, that you're not coming as an expert and you don't come with resources. That throws the 2 big elephants out of the room. And then they say, now what the hell do we do? We don't have money, because the first thing is, are you bringing money?
Once
you get that out of the room, then people start to look at, so what do we have? And so I really slow that process down to get people to begin to feel what the notion of gifts is. Because for many of them, that notion of gifts and abundance does not exist in the paradigm of the world. Theirs is a mentality of scarcity and self-interest.
Even for the communities that feel scarce, the temptation is to find a partner that will bring the resources.
Absolutely.
It bakes a power dynamic into the beginning of the relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, so the idea is, as we go into and so what the organization has created a number of partners throughout our city area who we walk with along the way. So once we do the initial workshop and they set up their committees, we then do what we call accompaniment. So we're available to them as a human resource. Should they come across a dilemma, they want a bank of good questions, they want to work through something, so we simply go in and facilitate that. And the intention is behind that is to be in the shadow. Always let them take center stage and stay fairly invisible in the space. So that, for many of them, as they facilitate a workshop for the first time, it's a very powerful experience because they didn't think it possible. They also think it's rocket science.
Yeah.
Until they learn that methodology, which is actually quite simple. Convene the damn group, put them in small groups and make them talk.
In Peter's book, Community, the Structure of Belonging, he writes, "The real task of leadership is to confront people with their freedom. This may be the ultimate act of love that is called for from those who hold power over others. Choosing our freedom is also the source of our willingness to choose to be accountable. The insight is that freedom is what creates accountability." He continues, "Freedom is not an escape from accountability, as popular culture so often misunderstands, but rather that freedom is what creates accountability."
Freedom is a risky place to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so easy. Freedom, we might all want it, but even the wanting of freedom is also has the opposite side of that. I want the freedom, but what does it mean in terms of my responsibility?
Keep going with that language of responsibility. And when we were first talking, you mentioned stewardship. Yeah. Talk a little more about that responsibility and stewardship of freedom.
The notion in many of the communities that we work in, they are what I would call self-appointed leaders. Whether they come from the churches or their professional status as a principal of a school or something like a businessman, and that role is one of leading people to a space. So what's happened is that the leader has kind of taken the responsibility. I will lead you. I will take responsibility for you. And so the notion of parent-child relationship is very strong. Mm-hmm. And they've been like that for a long, long time. So when you confront people with their freedom, they're reluctant to step up because they're cynical about what this means for them. They're cynical about when you say you can say something and not be judged. When you can disagree with something and there's nothing in the room that says, wow, I did something really wrong here. And then when you confront people with the issue of, so what does it mean to be free as a conversation? Most people shut down because, one, they haven't experienced it. But two, they get a sense of, listen, this is really unpredictable. I can't control this thing. Or more importantly, I'm the one in charge of myself now, or this work. And what does it mean for me? Because here people make promises very glibly to things without any real understanding of what that commitment means. What's the responsibility? And that's where most things break down. And so I really slow things down at that point and say it's okay not to take responsibility right now. But are we aware that when we do speak, when we claim our freedom, what is the cost to yourself and to the other? And really spend time on that and giving enough space for them to withdraw, to be conservative, to back out. And so when the few commitments do come, they're deeper and they're longer lasting. Mm-hmm. So this thing about freedom and responsibility comes up all the time in the work. And in my estimation, that is the real work: freedom, responsibility, commitment to making it happen. And I don't think it's just a local experience, a global experience of how it happens. And it's because the sense of community and support for the work that you're doing has not been worked with deeply enough. So we have a semblance of community, but the reality is that the actual work of building the social fabric is not deeply embedded. And I think that's the work that needs to get done. We talk about A, B, C, D and abundance, the principles, but until it becomes a lived experience, problems, warts and all, for many people it still remains something to reach for. So a lot of the work for us is trying to give them a task that gives them the opportunity to experience the elements we speak about in Peter's conversations, about dissent, about possibility, about all the things in a real way in terms of the actual project. And that way it gets bedded down. But even having said that, our thing is also that the unpredictably means that projects will fail, people will fall down. And to understand that it's okay. No one's going to kill you for that. This happens in the work. And just to even accept that, because failure is a big thing here. Everybody wants to blame you for something. And the notion actually it's our failure together or our success together. What does that mean for us? So it's those ongoing conversations about whenever something comes up, to use it as a learning point very experientially. And stop that voice of judgment, stop that thing of yes and no, of winning and losing, and shift that culture into the place of we and the work. That really is the work, in my estimation, what we have to do. And it's hard.
So tell me a little bit about failure then that you've learned from.
Failure for me is, very often linked to places where partners that came into a community came with either money or resources, and the contracting was flawed in terms of how it was done. And so you have a recipient and a donor, a giver of something. Would really, if you look at and these projects are almost always time bound. They never have enough traction to leave anything permanent in the community, and so people get cynical. So you'll find in many communities halls that were built that are now in disuse, not used. Projects started with young people, and halfway through the project, when the money runs out, the kids are left alone. Those are the kind of failures. So people have learned, I think, how to play the game. If people come with money, they'll find a way to get the money. The donor is happy because they've got a time-bound project with some deliverables. And so we all become complicit in the game. And at the end of it, it's a community that loses by it, but some individuals will gain something from it. So failure is very often, I think, the inability to contract authentically about what it is we each want from the relationship. And those failures have come. They've come in our schools. We try to work in a school, and outside actors come in, powers that are beyond us, at a higher level. Very much like your school system back home in the US as well. There are layers and layers and layers of power and hierarchy and patriarchy. So even when you work quite authentically at the level of the school itself is part of a bigger system, which is so monstrous that you can't get through it, and you just have to keep. So sometimes I even question the work. You work, you motivate the teachers, you get the staff, you bring the community, and then you get this bloody thing that just keeps hitting you from the top of saying, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. And that's an ongoing frustration. So, and the thing for us is to accept that failure, it's not just the falling down, it's being able to get yourself up and take responsibility and do something else, find another way through it. And it's not either or, there's always something that you can do, anything as opposed to standing still. So if you stand still, the notion of victimhood gets more deeply embedded. And then there are enough people to come and save you after that.
While they don't name it directly, Peter, Walter, and John's work really talks about giftedness or calling forth gifts as almost a response to that age-old temptation to fall into the narrative of victimhood that Rama is talking about. In their book, Abundant Community, John McKnight and Peter describe associations in this way. They say associations are a primary place in community where individual capacities get expressed. If I want to manifest my kindness or generosity, and I want to do it in a collective way, then I create or join an association. Association is a structural property of a competent community. It's the aspect of community that's repeatable. It has continuity and it has membership. Otherwise, it's just a meeting. And they continue, if you and I want to have breakfast together, good. If we want to ask two friends to join us and have breakfast every month, then we're an association. You can tell who is in an association because an association has boundaries.
There was one case in the township that we worked in. Again, it was a community gathering first, and we asked them, so what can you do? And the thing was, again, you had no money and resources. And so we did an audit of what gifts were in the room. We put that up on the board and we saw it there, and we spent 2 days clustering and getting people to talk around those themes. And the one thing that stands out for me is the one guy who says, he had the most beautiful garden in Kwamakuta. He wasn't a botanist. He loved his garden. Was the pride that everyone knew about his garden. So there was the I. And so the notion was, so you love gardening. How can we use this amazing gift to start to beautify this township? Because the townships are very stark, rows of houses, very little greenery. And so they started a little street committee. So it said, okay, so what if you just take just your street and we convene a group in your street, just for the houses there, and see whether we can make that street the best gardening place in the township. And we laughed about it, and we said, okay, so how can we do this? So they convened the meeting. There were 6 families present there. And of course, he felt really good because he was strutting his stuff.
Yeah.
And the idea was simply, let's just first clean up our street. There were 18 houses in that little street, a cul-de-sac, so it was perfect. And they started doing that. So on one Saturday, they got together with the kids and just cleaned the street up. And then they wanted to get plants. So I said, how the hell do you get trees and plants here? So someone said, why didn't we ask the city? And someone said, the usual cynicism, don't waste your time, they will do nothing. But of course, it wasn't true. So they approached the city, helped them draft a letter to the city, telling them what they're trying to do, send a couple of photographs through. And the next week, the guy who runs our botanical garden came down to the place. He was blown away by what he saw. He said, how we wish more people could do things like this. And his big task, how can we help you? And so they brought in tree stock and plants and gave them advice. And that street committee started to flourish from that. From that project, we went through a tree planting situation in Kwamakuta. So got the group together and we joined them. And what the city did was they came with their back toe ended thing and helped us dig the big holes. Mm-hmm. And we put the trees in, and we told the house whose tree was planted in front, you take responsibility for this tree. Just this one tree.
Wow.
Make sure at the end of the day, you water this tree. Can you do that? Oh, no, of course we can do that. Well, if you look at the township now, those trees are all flourishing. And even the sense of taking care of the trees and, with each other, the sense of the we is slowly coming because people are noticing that the trees are there.
As you're starting at that smaller scale, then this builds to an authentic ask, because it isn't asking the city for a handout of a tree. It's asking the city for the city's leverage to be able to steward a tree. And then this moves from that community into the entire city, entire town.
And absolutely. And that, I think that what we're trying to do always when we form these committees is to talk about this notion of shared leadership. And what does it mean? Do we need a leader here? There's 5 of you. Do you need a leader? Do you need a convener? What is the purpose? And so in defining that, they start talking about stewardship without mentioning the word.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the words get in the way of the work. So now I'm a steward. So it becomes another...
Don't call me a leader, I'm a steward. Put it on my name tag, yeah.
So the notion of saying we are a group, we each have responsibilities. And at some point, when we start to go back, they will begin to see that, in fact, they are acting more in the role as stewards. They are taking responsibility for a small area of work, and that notion of shared leadership. So as new members come in, they come in as members of that cohort, with what value they bring into it. Mm-hmm. And so very slowly something starts to happen. And we hear it in their stories. And there are many projects that they're doing at the moment. And the interesting for us, they don't even feel the need to tell us about their projects. We hear about it anecdotally. They're building a school hall, and they say, actually, we don't need to tell you. You started your work, now we're doing our work.
We got it. We got it from you.
We got it. So it's okay, let it go.
Oh, it's outstanding.
So ego takes a bit of a bash because you say, wow, you guys are doing great work. But then it becomes for them the norm. That's how they work. The committees function the same way. You go into that township, they're always meeting in small groups. So we've trained community facilitators in the methodology, mm-hmm. and we support them. So, little things that they need so we got at DDP a number of portable battery charged PA systems.
Oh, sure.
So people can be heard. We negotiate with churches so that we can use their halls for free and with the city. So cut the costs down, work on local catering and local production. Everything that Peter speaks about, John's, we want to live into that as best as we can. It's not always possible to the extent we'd like it to be, but just the notion of that, let's first use what we have before we go out to buy from somewhere else or anything like that. And it takes a good time for that to get embedded in the community, that we have gifts, we have abundance here.
Rama, Naidu, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure having you in our city and having this conversation with you today.
Being present at that first meeting was deeply symbolic, that people could come together with no other intention except doing something bigger than themselves to make this a better world. That's a huge, huge thing. And so many of them. I think there are many like-minded people who would like to do something, but don't have the structure or the convening of the gathering for that to happen. I think my life's purpose is to ignite those kind of spaces, to bring people together like you did in Cincinnati. We make way for the newness. And the way we do that is by gathering like-minded people together to just get out and do the work.
This has been the Common Good Podcast, conversations at the intersection of place and belonging and remembering. You can learn more about the work of Rama, Naidu, as well as the work of Peter, John, and Walter, and now the Common Good Fellowship, and daily food for thought emails at commongood.cc. Common Good is a collaborative production of The Hive, a center for contemplation, art, and action in Cincinnati, as well as Common Change, eliminating personal economic isolation. We're produced by myself, Troy Bronsink, and Joey Taylor. Music is written and produced by Jeff Gorman. So we're 9 episodes into this Common Good podcast thing, and if you're starting to feel intimidated by all the ideas, take Rama's word for it.
They didn't think it possible. They also think it's rocket science. Yeah. Until they learn that methodology, which is actually quite simple. Convene the damn group, put them in small groups, and make them talk. This is